though the system in law in Australia is completely different to that in Belgium, because we have a common law, we're a common law country, while Belgium's legal system is based on a civil law philosophy or system. I'm interested in hearing what some of the practical differences are in the two systems. And before we started this interview, you were telling me about how a typical criminal law case might run in Belgium. And I was wondering whether you could tell me about it, like tell me how somebody who might be charged with a criminal offence, what the process might be for them that they go through.
Yeah, for example, in a criminal case, let's just say a drug case or something, then you will be brought before which is called the correctional court. And depending on the severity of the case, if it would be like an organized crime, it would come in front of 3 judges, and otherwise it would be a sole magistrate. And it is true that in civil law countries, the judge really has a role as an investigator. So the trial will start with like the judge giving a bit of a brief resume of the facts of the case, and then doing an interrogation of the perpetrator. So not an interrogation of the lawyer, but an interrogation of the perpetrator, starting with like, what's your name and date of birth? That's the first question always. Mm-hmm. And then just things that when they prepared their file, because they don't always have time to prepare their files, but they would have like a list of questions to ask to them. And then right after that interrogation has happened, then the victim or the victim's lawyer, because usually people will be represented in court. They don't always have to, but usually they will be. And then they will just they will give a bit of a resume of the facts, but they can't really talk about the criminal aspect of the case. They can just ask for their compensation, which is like even calculated in some kind of way. For example, if they have like an injury that that results in not being able to work, or like being 50% like a disability to work, then it will be like according to official legislation how they have to calculate their compensation. So they can't.
And what about if they can't pay the perpetrator?
That happens a lot. Well, then they will, generally, there is like a fund. This is the fund for victims of crimes of aggression, and then they can submit like an application with them. So there's, for example, I've in my job in the women's refuge, I've assisted quite a few times now with a victim services application. So it's something similar like that. Yeah, then they can do that.
It's conflated, like it's joined. Whereas in Australia, there's a criminal case, and then there might be a civil case to.
They can sometimes, it will come together at first, and then in bigger cases they can like the judge can order a court calendar, and then which will be like everything needs to be in writing first. So both parties and even the public prosecutor, who is a separate party, will get like a set date to submit their written conclusions, we call them. I'm not sure what the terminology for that is in
submissions.
Yes, submissions. And then there will be set a date for the first hearing, and then the pleadings will happen. And sometimes after the criminal part of the case has been, that's always prior, then they can set the case to a later date for the it's called like the resolution of the civil aspect of the case. Or so they can do it together. It's really different. It's the problem is that I don't have anything to compare it with. I'm really triggered. I want to go to court here to see how it's like, and just to see all the differences.
As long as you're not the perpetrator.
No. Just to see. For example, one of my colleagues at the Women's Refuge, she works for WDVCAS, for Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Service, and I was like, hey, can I go to court with you just to see, just like to observe the court system, because I think that would be really, but like in smaller cases, for example, if it's like a burglary or anything, then it can be, everything can be just all handled in on the same court hearing, and after the judges or the judge interrogates the perpetrator, then the victim will ask for compensation, and then they will give the floor to the public prosecutor. The public prosecutor will ask for the sentence, like for example 5 years or whatever, or you have to do like community service or anything like that, and then it's the pleadings of the perpetrator, and then there might follow like an answer, replica, something, replica, yeah. I'm just using my terminology, but it's probably incorrect. Anyway, I'll find out later about it. Yeah. So
I was going to ask you though, because before we started this, you were saying a little bit about it's not actually police that they must investigate the crimes.
Yeah, police always investigates the crime, but the majority of all cases will be always investigated by police. But then it can go two ways. If the perpetrator is held longer than 24 hours, they need to show in front of they need to be represented in front of a judge. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just they will be released within 24 hours, and then the investigation goes further, and the head of the investigation will be the public prosecutor. Well, if they're imprisoned for longer than 24 hours, they have to, right before that 24 hours ends, they have to go to court in front of a judge, will be interrogated again, and then the judge can decide if they will be released in a waiting for their trial, or if they can be imprisoned longer, which is pre-trial, which is like there's still the what is it called?
So
like
a little bit like our bail system where we go.
Yes, because then the judge can release them on bail with like conditions, like you have to keep your job, you cannot get any you have to leave the victim alone, or like or you have to follow an aggression course, or like go to rehab, stuff like that. Otherwise, in very severe cases, they will be brought within, if the judge decides not, you're going to stay in prison, they will have to go to a hearing before, in French it's called la chambre du conseil. So it's like the chamber.
That's so beautiful. Can you say that again?
La chambre du conseil. So like the chamber of the council, which is like a courtroom, and they can imprison you for another 30 days, and then you have to,
and then
you have to reappear again before that same courtroom, or you can go into appeal before la chambre des mises en accusation, which is the chamber of accusation. Yeah.
Oh, wow. It sounds so lovely. But there's not many jury trials, is there, in Belgium?
Oh, there's lots. Yeah, and it can take a very long time. It can take up to like 2 years before your case is tried.
So if you're waiting for 2 years, does that mean every 30 days you have to appear before a judge?
Yeah. Well, as long as you're held if you're imprisoned. Yes. But it can work both ways, really. So when I was in my second year as an intern, I actually had a pretty rough case. I would call it my most rough, or my roughest case ever. Yeah. Toughest. Yeah. And that was my lawyer, the lawyer that I was working for, like, Kim, can you go to prison because we have this new client? And I went to prison, and I went to the courtroom first to have a look into the file, because that's what we do. And then it was like a very severe pedophile case.
Yeah.
Anyway, in one of the first hearings, the judge actually decided I came up with like a plan to go to some kind of counseling specifically for sexual perpetrators, and they released him. They released him on bail. It took him 2 years to get to his trial, where he got imprisoned for 10 years. So he was like free for 2 years, and then he got imprisoned for 10 years, which was, in my opinion, like a bit out of balance. But
Yes.
that's just how the court system works.
Yeah,
So
for to
it
wait
was a
for that
very
long.
severe. So I mean, I'm not going to say anything like it's not the right.
So when you
sentence
say
or-
that you weren't happy, when you think it was out of balance, it was more because the process took so long.
It took so long, and then because that person I was his lawyer, but not defending the facts, because it was quite horrible. But that person was like was going to therapy weekly, and then they come in front of like a different court that doesn't know anything further about the person, that just opens a file once and says like, oh my God, this is horrible. Look at those pictures. Look at what he's done.
Yeah.
Up to jail for 10 years now.
And do they have the same sort of parole system in Belgium? Like, so that we might get a sentence of 10 years, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll serve 10 years.
No, that's the same. So after you get in front of a different court then, which is for the execution of the sentence. But with sexual assault crimes, it'll be usually 2/3 of the sentence, unless it has changed, because it's been 3 years since I've practiced. But for like other crimes, it'll be after one third of your sentence. You have the possibility, the option to like plead before that. It's not always even in front of the court to get released earlier. But for sexual crimes, it's double.
Yeah, 2/3.
Yeah, 2/3.